بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Now on this topic, in terms of inclusion, and in particular, it's supposed to be more of a discussion, but just some opening remarks about including women, including young people, and including their voices in a way that's not just tokenizing, but substantial. The first thing that I want to say when it comes to this topic of truly appreciating who you have in your community, as women, as young people, and also men as well, everyone needs to be appreciated. Everyone needs to have their place in serving the greater community. We look to the Quran, and we look to the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and we look to the great generations after him, and we look to our tradition. And the first thing I want to say, especially to women in this community, women in this hall today, is that the ultimate reason why we as a community should not be tokenizing women is because Allah did not tokenize women. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, one sahabiya, one companion of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, she notices how the language of the Quran seems to, even though it's the masculine plural, right, includes women. She starts to worry, what about us, right? What about the reward of the women? Do we also get reward? Are we also included in the reward that's spoken about in the Quran? One woman asks a question, and Allah reveals the famous verses from Surah Ahzab. And I'm going to read the translation of the verse, and I want us to just think about what is Allah saying to this sahabiya, and what is Allah saying to every woman, every believing woman for the rest of time. For Muslim men and Muslim women, for believing men and believing women, for devout men and devout women, for men and women who patiently persevere, for men and women who humble themselves, for men and women who give in charity, for men and women who fast, for men and women who guard their chastity, for men and women who engage much in Allah's praise. For them has Allah prepared forgiveness and a great reward. One woman asks a question, and any ambiguity is clarified. The reward in this deen is for men and women. In the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are spiritually equal. The only thing that differentiates one person from the next is their taqwa, is their mindfulness, their God consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many verses in the Quran, but I'm only going to read one. In Surah Ali Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Never will I allow to be lost the work of any of you, be they male or female." The reason I chose this particular verse is because there's a word that maybe we've heard before. It's a word that I've heard from women in our communities. This idea that women can do so much work. Women can make the flyers, do the marketing, organize the entire thing, right? In communities, and they get none of the credit. They get none of the appreciation. They get none of the thank yous. And aside from not getting recognition, if anything goes wrong, then that's when it's like, sister so-and-so made this mistake. And so for a lot of women in the Muslim community, they feel that even when we get involved, there's an experience of erasure. It's like we didn't do it. Now, for women who experience this, and they don't just experience it in community life, they may experience it in the workplace, they may experience it in a classroom, they may experience it in their homes, in their families, right? A lack of appreciation, a lack of receiving credit. What I want to say is the only credit, yes, we want to rectify our communities. Definitely, Islah is something we aim for. We want to have insaf, we want to have justice, we want to have fairness. But the most important credit, the most important appreciation, the most important one that sees everything that is done and everything that everyone else ignores is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we're getting our credit from Allah, if we're getting our reward with Allah, if Allah is our goal, If our hisab is with Allah, then there is no effort that is lost from anyone, be you male or female, no matter what condition your community's in. So for people who feel sometimes defeated, they go into a community space and they try to get involved and then it doesn't work, return to this intention. I'm not doing this work for this world. I'm doing this work for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My service is for Allah. My efforts are for Allah. In your lifetime, you may see changes, you may see progress, your community may be more inclusive, inshallah things move forward. But even if you don't see that progress, none of your efforts are lost or wasted when you did them for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His credit is the only credit that matters. And He sees what no one else sees. He sees the pain, the hurt, the difficulty. He sees how hard it may have been for you sometimes. So I want to say that before our communities include us, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already included you. You're already included. It may take time for people to accommodate that reality. And the closer we get to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is guiding us to in the Quran, what the Prophet Muhammad has guided us to, what the companions themselves exemplified, right? The closer we can get to that, the better we're doing as a community. And the further away we get from that, the greater indication of actually the disease that exists. And there are diseases that are the reason for exclusivity, right? So I want to say sexism is a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual problem. It's not just a social problem, it's a spiritual problem for a person to feel I'm better than you simply because of my gender. No, you have a daraja in marriage. No one denies that. But in front of Allah, who knows who's better? Only Allah knows who's better. So anytime a person feels I'm better than someone else, there's an arrogance. Anytime a person feels that I can't listen to this particular voice because it's a woman, because she comes from that country, or he comes from that country, or because this person's young, there's a problem. And it's a spiritual problem. It's not just a social issue. It means there's something that's wrong in the heart. There's something that needs to be fixed. In the heart, there's an ana. There's an I. And the I has covered the place where a person is actually supposed to listen to huwa, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as much as we're able to get rid of the I of the ego, and we can listen more to the He of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our interactions with one another, in the way that we include each other, in the way that we organize our community programs, in the way that we set our sights for longevity, not short-term, easy solutions that seem to be convenient, but really looking at things from a principled perspective. And as much as we're able to be God conscious, to be principled, then we get the actual results that are meant for us in al-akhirah. Sometimes we get the results in this life, and that's good, but our ultimate purpose is not the results of this life. You can die and your community didn't get better. You can work 20 and 30 years and you didn't see major progress. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we are raised on the day of judgment, that will be a mountain of good deeds if the intentions are sincere. And someone else can do very little compared to you, and the results in this life can be amazing. And again, if we try to be results-oriented for this life and not results-oriented for al-akhirah, one of the mistakes that happens when we do that is if it's for this life and it's not about al-akhirah, then our means and our methods tend to deviate. There's this idea, do the ends justify the means? The only time the ends justifies the means is if the ends are rooted in al-akhirah. Then that's called, because the ends are justified, because the ends are in al-akhirah, your ends are about paradise, your ends are about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're going to be principle-oriented. And if you're principle-oriented, it doesn't matter if you succeed or don't succeed in this life. You still succeed in al-akhirah, and that's what matters. If you're results oriented about this life, I need to see this change right now, guess what happens? And you're not thinking about al-akhirah, and you're striving for islah, fitna, drama, major problems, divisions, infighting. All kinds of problems happen because when it's rooted in this life, we lose our way. There's isti'jal, this idea of rushing towards something that maybe it's going to change, it's not going to change immediately, it'll change 2 months from now. Like waiting the course, having hikmah, having wisdom. And so, to everyone who's doing work in their local communities and on the larger scene, the nasiha, whether you're trying to include young people and their voices, whether you're trying to include women and their voices, is to be principle-oriented with your intentions rooted in al-akhirah, and not to be results-oriented with your intentions rooted in this life. If we get that equation wrong, that's basically what a lot of the modern ideologies did. Whether it's communism or feminism or any other ism that you see, it's not rooted in God. It's rooted in some kind of change in this life, some kind of methodology that people came up with that doesn't have anything to do with the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we want what we do to be blessed, and we want what we do to count. We don't want these efforts to be lost. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is keeping track of what all of us do. Whether you're male or female, whether you're young or old, no matter what background you come from, continue to consider yourself included, even when your communities don't include you, because Allah has included you. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us. And I'm looking forward to the rest of this discussion. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum.